there needs to be a massive cultural shift in how politics operates and in the way that laws are made. Because at the moment, with the legislation on the books, generally speaking, it's one to license animals that are being abused and not to free them and protect them from that abuse.
Yeah, and if that cultural shift is massive and quick, then it's a revolution because it's a shift and it's quick. So, but if it's slow, that it takes millennia, then it will be an evolution. Welcome to Vegan Reflections, when I, Jordi Casamitjana, has a conversation with another vegan about the subject I wrote about in veganfta.com. Kim Stallwood is an animal rights author and independent scholar with more than 45 years of personal commitment as a vegan and professional experience in leadership positions. The British Library acquired the Kim Stallwood archive in 2020. He is a consultant with Tier in Recht, the Zurich-based animal law organization, on projects preserving animal rights history, including acquiring his library. He is writing the biography of Topsy, the female Asian elephant electrocuted to death on Coney Island, New York in 1903. As a volunteer, he is a member of the Culture and Animals Foundation Board of Directors and was the executive director of Mining Animals International between 2012 and 2017. His book, Growl, is published by Lantern. He is a contributor to various academic anthologies. Working in a chicken slaughterhouse prompted him to become a vegetarian in 1974, and he became a vegan in 1976. Okay, thank you, Kim, for having accepted my invitation to this 5th episode of Vegan Reflections. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well today. Thank you, Jordi. And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
No problem. You were involved, and probably you still are, in writing the biography of Topsy the elephant that was electrocuted suddenly. You're still working on this? Is that still a project going?
Yes, it's still a work in progress. It's taking a long time, but other projects keep getting in the way. But I'm writing the biography of Topsy the elephant, and she was an Asian elephant who was captured in Southeast Asia in about 1875 as a baby and was brought via Germany to New York and ended up in Philadelphia. And she was trained and performed with the four-paw circus throughout the United States. But what people know about Topsy, if they know anything, is how she was killed, and she was deliberately electrocuted to death at Luna Park on Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York in 1903. And her electrocution was filmed, and it is available to watch on YouTube. And that's probably the most that anyone ever knows anything about Topsy, is the last minute of her life. But I felt that it was important to remember her and attempt to write her biography. And that's the project, one of the projects that I'm very much involved with right now.
Well, I'm looking forward to read it when it's ready. Really, I want to really know what happened with her life. Well, this episode is about a subject of an article I wrote the month before. That's the theme of Vegan Reflections. We always do that. And that article is titled Vegan Revolution or Vegan Evolution. Is essentially asking the question that in the future, when we have the vegan world, because I'm convinced we're going to have it, how would we have achieved that? How would historians look back and say, this is how it was achieved? Would have been just a gradual evolution change, as very small changes, almost imperceivable at any given time, or would be a revolution, so a big change in a very short period of time where directions of the world are changing significantly, and the paradigm is a paradigm change, one or the other. So my article is a speculation about which ones I think it would be. And of course, you are the perfect guest for this, because you are somebody that has looked back, not just speculating the future, as all vegans do. We all dream with that future. But you have look back, because as we can see behind you, you have a lot of books, and you had a lot of books. You seem to have been accumulating a lot of information through the history of animal rights and veganism. And that obviously gives you a perspective of how things used to go, how things have happened in the past, the movements, and that might give you a good information to answer that question. But also, please tell me a little bit more about what you're doing now with all this information, because I know you've been involved in sharing it now with the rest of the world. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, 50 years ago this summer, I worked when I was a student in a chicken processing plant. And towards the end of 1973, beginning in 1974, I became vegetarian, and then I became vegan 2 years after that. And then later in 1976, I began unknowingly a career working for animal rights organizations, primarily in the UK and in the USA. And I started work for Compassion in World Farming as their second full-time employee as a campaigns organizer. And since that point in time, I just collected stuff, and I felt that it was too important to throw away. And so over the ensuing nearly 50 years, I had accumulated quite a lot of material, and I proactively sought out and spent a lot of my own money buying materials, to the point that as I approach my 70th birthday in a year or two's time, I've got to think I've got to find homes for all this stuff. And what I'm very delighted to say is that I have relationships with two very good institutions who have taken different parts of my collection. So the British Library in London took what were my research materials. So these are materials which were files, organizational files, files of correspondence with people, files about different subjects. And there was some 800 or so files. They took all those files. They took 2 old laptops to download the material from the laptops, and a box of old appointment diaries and address books. And these are raw research materials which have gone into the British Library as the Kim Stallwood archive. They've been catalogued, and they are now available for people to have a look at, and the British Library will hold them for however long the British Library exists, which is hopefully forever, as much as anything can be forever. I had to embargo some of the materials for 25 years because of their sensitivity, but that's where one large part of my collection has gone. And then the remainder of my collection, and some of which has already gone to an organization in Zurich, Switzerland, called Tierrecht, which roughly translates as animal rights. And Tierrecht is a animal law firm that is a charity. And what attracted me to them was that they had an incredibly well-organized and extensive full library in their offices. And I knew that they were serious players in wanting to preserve the history of the animal rights movement as I do. And after various discussions and meetings and the opportunity to visit their offices, I could see that they were an ideal organization to take the rest of my materials. And I'm very glad that they've agreed to do so. Those materials are in the process of being also catalogued and properly archived. And they will, in the course of time, also be available, along with all the other materials that they have that is now available to people for research. In my office here, the books behind me aren't part of my animal rights books, but you can't see it's off camera, but to the right, there are more than 2,000 books about animals in one form or another. And I still use these books for the projects that I'm working on today. And eventually, though, those books will also go from here to Zurich to be part of the collection at Tirum Recht.
And you're going to do a talk soon in the British Library, isn't it, about this sort of thing?
Yes, the British Library is hosting a public meeting on Tuesday, May the 16th in the evening. People can attend in person or they can attend online. And if you go to the British Library website and search my name, you'll come across the page that has all the information about that. And the evening is to discuss and celebrate the acquisition of my archive by the British Library. And I'm very excited that Annette Pick, who's an animal studies scholar, will be joining us as the chair of the evening. I'm very excited about her presence. And the other two panelists, in addition to myself, are going to be Paula Sparks from the Association of Lawyers for Animal Welfare and Jonathan, oh gosh, I've just forgotten his name, the archivist from the British Library, who I worked with on the acquisition of the materials. So this meeting is to sort of talk about the importance of preserving the history of the movement and why that is important, and how people should be aware of the history and what they can do about it.
Excellent. Let's kick in the conversation about the subject, revolution versus evolution. First of all, my article, I start with an analysis of whether, or the question whether revolutions work, whether they achieve what they set up to achieve. But first of all, I had to kind of define what I meant by revolution. And I just meant any change that happens in society that happens relatively quickly. And I mean, in a couple of decades, the most a couple of centuries, but no more than that. If it's millennia, that's evolution. But it's also a change that had to change the direction where things are going substantially. Kind of that's where the word revolution comes from, to revolve, to turn around. So, and when you look at this definition, there are many that fit: the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, they all fit. And when you look at them, many, in my opinion, did achieve more or less, not completely, but many, what they wanted to achieve. There was a substantial change that lasted, and it was relatively quick. So they do work. So what are your thoughts that you know about history? Do they work, revolutions?
You're starting with the easy questions first, are you? Do revolutions work? Well, they can. They don't always, I don't think. And they sometimes have unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences can be even more problematic than what the revolution originally was set out to tackle. Gosh, I don't know. I think it depends upon the situation. Of course, one would love to see a vegan revolution. And that's something that I've thought about a lot over the years that I've been involved. And there's talk of a vegan revolution within the last couple of years or so. And I find myself sometimes in situations where I'm traveling and the opportunities to have access to vegan food is minimal or non-existent. And I usually complain to myself about how the vegan revolution hasn't reached wherever it is that I am failing to find anything vegan to eat. But I think generally speaking, if we're talking about revolutions and in the broadest definitions of the word, not just in the usual connotations of extremely violent revolutions. If we talk generally about revolutions, yes, I think we do need revolutions, and that they are generally a good thing, depending upon, of course, the unique set of circumstances. So, and I was interested in the way in which you define revolution as being something that could last many years. I think you said even up to like 200 years. That's a long revolution. Because I normally think of revolutions as being fairly quickly, within like 5-10 years, maybe. If you were to say 200 years, well, then it could be argued that we are at the end of 200 years of a revolution of sorts, in the sense that last year we celebrated the bicentenary of the Martins Act, which was the first animal welfare legislation passed by an elected government in the world, the British Parliament. And I know there were problems with the constitution of the British Parliament at that time, as opposed to who had the vote and who didn't. But it passed the Martins Act, which was the first animal welfare legislation of its kind. And that legislation was to do with the treatment of animals raised for food at that time, and how there were steps it became illegal to cruelly treat them. And so that was a very important point in the history of our very long-term development of compassion for animals. And one could also argue that since, certainly some people like to date the beginning of the modern animal rights movement to the publication of Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation, in 1975. I understand why people say that, but I don't necessarily agree with it. For me, what was the starting pistol, if you like, of the modern animal rights movement is Bridget Brophy's essay called The Rights of Animals, that was published in the Sunday Times newspaper in 1964. And of course, we got to know that Peter Singer is a utilitarian and not a rights-based philosopher, and doesn't talk about animal rights per se. But Brophy's essay, The Rights of Animals in 1964, really did set out the heart of what it means when we talk about animal rights. So one could date the beginning of the revolution from then. Of course, in the mid-early 60s was the beginning of the activist movement as well. So with the Hunt Saboteurs Association emerging at that point, and then organizations that fell into line after that. So,
and we could of course say 1944 with the creation of the Vegan Society, that might have been the beginning of the vegan social movement, which is the beginning of the revolution.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yes. And I think you're right to actually make that point. I agree. So, yes, we need revolutions, but there's a lot of caveats in there as to, what kind of revolutions that we actually do need.
And which kind of the revolution would be the vegan revolution that makes us to the vegan world? The way I look at it, it has to be, otherwise it would not be a vegan revolution. It has to be a non-violent revolution. It has to be a global revolution, and it has to be a socio-political revolution. It has to affect people's attitudes, but also have to become laws and change the way that we regulate the behavior of people. So it has to have all that, non-violent, socio-political, and global. That's to qualify as a vegan revolution. What's your view of how a vegan revolution would need to be or will be?
Well, you haven't said much there that I would disagree with. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think perhaps one way that I would frame what you're saying is to say that I think we need a revolution at the individual level, and we need revolution at the institutional level. So the individual level is what goes on in our hearts and minds, how we live every day, how we interact with other people, and so on. Then at the institutional level, it's at the level of public policy, legislation, and how society is and how society operates and the values inherent within society. So I tend to think in terms of institutional and individual change as being two sides of the same coin. And I think that when I look back at what the animal rights movement does and still does, is that it primarily is focused upon individual change. And I think that we've got to this place because we've come to this place because of our own individual experience. We've had revelatory moments, personal transformative moments, when we realized the up to that point, how we've been living had been reliant upon the abuse and killing of animals. And once the veil is lifted from that and we see the food on our plate is from a dead animal, and so on, we begin to see things very differently. And we go through a sort of transformative process. And I think that process is so powerful that we tend to think that if only we could create that same process in other people, then voila, somehow or another, miraculously, we would achieve change. And I would think that may be possible, but I don't think it's really truly possible, because I'm afraid to confess to a deeply cynical view about public behavior and people's behavior, in that not everyone is going to care as much as we care about animals and the type of society that we envisage. And that's why we got to operate at the same time at the institutional level, because ultimately, I think that as much as important it is for people to individually change, we need laws, and those laws need to be written to give animals the protection which they deserve. And really, we frankly don't have much in the way of those laws at the moment.
Yeah, because if we think about it, is there any revolution that could be classed as successful revolution where they didn't reach that institutional level, that only grew from an individual evolution point of view? I don't think there is any. There's a point in any revolution where systemic change happened, and it becomes a legal change. It becomes something more than just an individual choice. And almost all the political revolutions obviously are like that. But also the big revolutions that are not political, like the industrial revolution or the commercial revolution or the science revolution, they all end up changing institutions in a substantial way. They are not just the building up of individual changes, as we sometimes naively think we can achieve the vegan world. So I think obviously you need those individual changes, because we need the bigger changes. You don't get the bigger changes without having decision makers and politicians that are vegan. So therefore, by making more vegans, you're gonna be making decision makers. You're gonna be making politicians, and then they can change the system from within. And then if there's enough of them, they can change it very fast, and then we have a revolution. But if we just ignore that fact, if we just say, well, let's wait for the systemic change, but let's ignore the individual change, we won't get the politicians and decision makers either. Isn't that right?
Yes, we need both. It's two sides of the same coin. I think our emphasis, though, is on the former, is on individual change, and that we don't place enough emphasis on institutional change. But I think it will come with time. And I think that we can already see trends going in this direction. So, for example, over the last 50 odd years, look at the veterinary profession. The veterinary profession is changing, and especially because it's changing because increasingly it's women who are becoming veterinarians and not men. And I think that they have a much empathetic attitude towards their client animals than generally men did. And so we can see a sort of change in the veterinary profession and becoming more aware through the science of animal welfare, and so on. So it's revolutions are very complicated, messy things, and they're not easy to define in sort of simplistic terms. I'm trying to avoid doing that myself here, but maybe not very successfully. But they it's a very changing society, and changing ourselves is a very complicated, messy business. And I think it doesn't help, frankly, that we as humans think ourselves as being far more intelligent and far more innovative than what we actually are. And I think that we are animals who are very much stuck into a routine and like an easy way out of doing things and avoid tackling problems, and think that we're more important than what we actually are in the overall scheme of things. So I'm a great proponent of thinking in terms of individual change and institutional change, but let's just up the institutional change more than what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, and I think to just follow up on what you just said, I think you're right. So our heads are big. Humans have always overestimated what we can do and underestimated what everybody else can do. And we are supremacists almost genetically to put ourselves up there and put everybody else down there. But of course, we vegans are also humans, so we're gonna have the same problems as well, unless we fight against them. And I think when I was trying to answer the question in my article of, are we already in that revolution? Are we living it already? It's just the beginning of it, or not? We're just changing gradually. It's an evolution situation we are now. So when I was looking, I also thinking, is this something we say often in a revolution because we vegans think we're winning? We vegans think that we have all the arguments and we're going to do it very quickly. But then when you look at the actual progress, we haven't really progressed that much in the bigger scheme of things. There's still with a minority of us, there's still animal products are the majority of the products out there. Still, the animal exploitation is increasing. There are more animals suffering in the world. So we haven't changed the direction of society. Therefore, and that was the prerequisite for my definition of revolution. It's not just change quickly, but it changes that substantially change direction. Now, the quickly part perhaps is true. If we just start with 1944 or 1966, doesn't matter. If we manage to do it in a century, that would be quick. That will qualify in my book. But we haven't changed direction yet. And that second part of the revolution is not there. So we're still evolving. We're not revolving. Perhaps at the most, I think we are gaining momentum in an evolution, but we haven't turned things around. So what do you feel?
Yeah. I think if we want to look for a quick revolution, the source of a quick revolution, I doubt is going to come from us being the vegan animal rights movement. And the quick revolution, ironically, I think, is going to come from the animal abuse industry, the animal industrial complex itself, because of what they do, especially with raising food. And how billions of animals are treated and the impact on the environment and on human health, because they are so adverse impacts, negative impacts, that there's going to probably be a revolution resulting from the consequences of the ways in which animals are raised for food. And now I'm thinking of things like our ability to be able to rely upon antibiotics is going to be challenged by the fact that so much antibiotics is fed to intensively reared animals, and when people eat their flesh, they ingest the residue of the antibiotics, and it's building up a what's the word I'm looking for?
Resistance.
Resistance. Thank you. A resistance to antibiotics. So I think that is. When things like that really hit the proverbial fan, then I think there's going to be a revolution, because it's going to be, frankly, in our selfish interest to tackle these issues and make the change. At the moment, we tend to put them off. We tend to avoid them or navigate around them, or pretend they don't exist, or pretend that they could happen. But I think that's where the quote revolutionary change is going to come from, and there's this bitter irony in the fact that it's probably going to come from that source.
And do you think that another example of this, of an external cause, would be environmentalism and global warming and the climate crisis?
It
absolutely. Might just come from the environmentalists that push the vegan agenda faster than we push it.
Yes, and I think that when these revolutionary moments happen, most likely there's going to be people in the press who will blame the vegans for it, right, because we didn't shout loud enough, right, which is just ridiculous. But I can well imagine some, especially right-wing pundit pontificating about the fact that we must blame the vegans because we didn't, they didn't shout loud enough, that they didn't tell us clearly enough what we now are going to be dealing with.
And I wonder whether in the history of revolutions that we have now are also a history written by historians as opposed to a description of what happens. And I wonder how many other successful revolutions actually were successful, not because the leaders were successful or the movement was successful, because the social political circumstances were leading towards that anyway. And the people in the revolution used the opportunity to accelerate the change. Perhaps
yes. History is owned by those who write it, and that was why it's very important that I wrote my own memoir of my involvement with animal rights in the book Growl, because I thought I'm not going to trust anyone else to write it. I'm going to write it myself. So I think that, as animal rights advocates, as vegans, we owe it to really monitor and keep ourselves updated as best we can. And there's a lot going on to keep yourself appraised of, but we need to be informed and reinformed of what is happening, because it's going to be these conversations with people, not so much about the ethics of how animals are treated, but it's about the consequences of the way in which animals have been unethically treated. It's issues to do with the antibiotics, for example, with the crisis, the environmental crisis, and we need to be able to be informed as best we can to tell people, to make them understand what the problem is and help navigate the way through the problem, not only for their individual lives, but also for the political impact. We do live in a democracy. We live in Britain. We live in a democracy of sorts. We're not fully a democratic country. We don't elect the second government, the second house of parliament, for example. But every 4 or 5 years, an election comes round, and we need to take full advantage of those general elections to raise the issues that are very important to us. Because I think ultimately, what is important is us to recognize that the laws relating to animals now are laws that basically license people as to how they can abuse animals. And these laws are written essentially by people who have a vested interest in the continuation of animal exploitation. There's a commercial interest involved. And what we need to do is get elected people who are vegans, who are animal rights people, who are don't have that conflict of interest, don't have that economic interest, and have the animals' hearts truly at interest, truly in their hearts, so that the legislation that gets written and passed is much more aligned with actually protecting animals and ensuring their rights than what we have at the moment. And that is a lot for us to work toward achieving. But that is the ultimate long-term strategy that we have to work toward. There needs to be a massive cultural shift in how politics operates and in the way that laws are made, because at the moment, with the legislation on the books, generally speaking, it's one to license animals that are being abused and not to free them and protect them from that abuse.
Yeah, and if that cultural shift is massive and quick, then it's a revolution, because it's a shift and it's quick. So, but if it's slow, that it takes millennia, then it will be an evolution. So the question of my article of what would it be, I don't really know, because how can we know? But the point is, if we do make the change, do we need more than just making the change? Do we need a mechanism to accelerate the change, to make it fast enough? Because my fear is that we might be too late if we just leave it to evolution. If we just leave it to accumulate people that are vegan, just have one vegan MP an extra vegan MP every 20 years. We won't get the quorum of vegans MPs necessary to make that cultural shift that makes important changes that are substantial. Is it too late? Do we need to find something to push it? Or we can rely on just accumulating change in the way that we've been doing it so far?
Well, okay, I think there's a number of questions in what you just said there, Jordi. Is it too late? Generally, is it too late? Yeah, I think it's probably too late, because I think the environmental crisis, we've gone beyond the tipping point, and there is going to be, perhaps not in our lifetimes, but maybe in the latter part of our lifetimes, massive change that society is going to be forced to confront. Having said that, though, we do have to operate here and now in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And we have to do what we can do within those circumstances. And we can certainly try and force change of those circumstances to make it slightly easier, more able to achieve the change. Change is happening. I mean, having admitted to be slightly pessimistic about everything, I'm going to make an optimistic point now, which is that in the last 20, 30 years or so, it's significant that there are, I think, some half dozen MPs in the House of Commons who are vegan. And when I first got involved with compassion world farming nearly 50 years ago, there was no MPs, were vegan. So to go from none to maybe 6 in 30, 40, 50 years may not sound like much progress, but I do think it is progress. And we've also got to look at comparable things like, for example, the number of women who are MPs. Now, the number of women who have become MPs has grown exponentially within the same period of time. And, they've worked hard. Many political parties have worked hard to actually achieve that. So I think it is possible to make those changes. I think that we need to be smarter and more politically astute about how we make those changes. And we need to keep working at the level of the individual, but it is the institutional change. And the institutional change, it does need a fundamental shift or revolution or however, you want to label it. And, we as vegans, we experience every day something I've learned to call vegan microaggressions. And, we are constantly assaulted, I think, by non-vegan references, non-vegan images, non-vegan attitudes from people. And, it does get tedious and tiresome after a while to just have every day have many of these micro-vegan aggressions to navigate around. And some of them are made innocently, some of them are made deliberately, some of them are made maliciously. And, we're constantly being forced to confront what we don't approve of, like, mildly putting it like that, what we hate, what keeps us awake at night. We're constantly exposed to that. So whilst progress is slow, we've got to also be mindful of what we are constantly up against, and recognize the accomplishments when they occur, and celebrate them, but know in the back of our minds that there's part of us going, it's not enough. I want more. Yes. I want it to go further.
Yes, I mean, I agree. And I am more optimist than you, probably, in the sense that I don't think it's too late. I think it's likely to be too late, but not completely too late. And I think in the end, the vegan world will come out, even if it's too late, because if we disappear as a species, then we have a vegan world. There's no humans there mistreating animals anymore. If we almost destroy the planet and there is a surviving group of humans, they can build easy a vegan world there with few people. So, but that's not the vegan world I want. I don't want a vegan world that is a survivalist world. I want a vegan world which is the best of the current world, not the consequences of the wars of the current world. So I want a vegan world that uses the compassion and all the things that we already have. We don't have to invent this, to prevent harming others, and doing it as much as possible, as wide as possible, and therefore using the current world we have to change things so we stop harming. That's the vegan world I want, the solution of the problems, not the survival of the bad things of humanity. But in the end, it still will be a vegan world, so no matter what. So therefore, that's why I'm optimistic, whatever happens. What I want is to contribute to the good solution, not to the bad solution, to the one that is the vegan world, that is the current world, as soon as possible. And if we want to do it as soon as possible, I think probably we might need some sort of revolution at one point or another, because it seems that things are going slowly. So the next point to reflect is, what should we do? Because if we don't really know what is going to happen, what should we do here as vegans? Should we just go for the revolution only? Should we just go for the evolution? Should we just, what we should do? I think we could do both. I think the concept here I use in my article is re-evolution. So both. So revolution and evolution in a single word, re-evolution, which means fostering continuous change no matter what, even if we don't perceive success, because that's what evolution is about. You don't perceive advances when you're in the middle of an evolution. But just keep advancing in all fields, just to be sure, but also kind of building the revolution already, having the fundamentals of the revolution ready, so when it happens, it doesn't need to turn that much because we already moved things enough. So basically maintaining the philosophy intact, the certain level of gatekeeping, just to be sure that is not diluted, that veganism maintains its philosophy, but also getting the strength of the movement, getting a bigger movement, getting a more resilient movement, more diverse movement, because that's the kind of movement we will need when the revolution starts, if it starts. So therefore, we could work in all these fields simultaneously, be happy with the small victories, even if they seem insignificant in a single issue campaign, but also just don't forget the bigger picture, don't forget the bigger change, and get the big politicians and decision makers to make big changes very quickly. What are your views about what should we be doing?
Well, again, you said much there that I do not disagree with, and I really ought to thank you for writing the article in the first place, because I thought it was a refreshingly different take on the challenges that we face, and I was very happy to share it on my social media for whatever that's worth. So we do need both. You're right. We do need both evolution and revolution, and the two somewhat sort of go badly hand in hand, and one helps the other. We can't rely on one over the other. We need both, and it's a question of, as I think you rightly discussed, it's the characteristics of evolutions and revolutions that we need to pay attention to, not whether one is an evolution or one's a revolution. And I agree with you about the non-violence thing, although asked me on a bad day, I might say something differently about that. But we need in Growl, I talked about the 4 key values as I understood it, which was compassion, justice, non-violence, and
truth.
A sense.
What was
the other one?
Truth as well.
Truth. Yes, yeah. Truth.
Yeah.
To tell the truth, to be compassionate, to be non-violent, and to work for justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much my sort of animal rights philosophy or vegan philosophy. The dynamic of being one of the things that is to our advantage is this, which is that by choosing to live the lifestyle that we do, choosing to live the way that we do, choosing not to buy products and buy other types of products, for example, choosing to think the way that we think, we, by our very existence, we do act as examples, creative, hopefully, aspirational examples to other people. And just our very existence, and by the growing numbers of us as vegans in a non-vegan world, we can, by the way in which we conduct ourselves, influence people greatly without the intention of actually doing it. And I've seen over the years many situations where people who aren't vegan, but I've had some interaction with them over a period of time, maybe or briefly, I can see that I've had some impact upon the way they think, the way they're looking about things, and the fact that they have changed their lives. And so I think that we've got to, we're fortunate in that we can live and breathe in a truly revolutionary way our revolutionary beliefs on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a great thing to be able to be empowered to be able to do, and that we should also interact with others and engage with others in a way that makes them feel aspirational. They also want to be vegan. Now, I know that's very difficult at times, and I've been in many situations where my vegan compassion just evaporates and goes out of the window in dealing with some people who should know better. And I get particularly frustrated with people who I have some engagement with, and they know who I am, they know what my life is dedicated toward, and yet they still eat meat in front of me. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Or they'll say something. And of course, one always wants to be the killjoy who says, wow, really, have you thought about this? Or why do you say it like that? But we've got to be, on the one hand, strike a very fine balance between being something that people want to emulate, that we have, but also sometimes we have to be the nagging teacher that leads them along the way to push them along the line to becoming vegan. I also want to say something about the fact that in saying all this about being vegan, we can't think that, how to say this without upsetting people, we can't let the being of being vegan be something that is so self-righteous and so oppositional and so putting people off that they don't want to become vegan themselves, or don't even want to think about it.
Yeah.
Or worse, that they behave in ways deliberately to attack vegan principles. We don't always have control over situations where this may happen, but I think we need to try and think that, and refrain from saying that whenever anyone presents a problem, that the answer is go vegan, because it is in many cases, but it's not in every case.
Right.
And we need to be mindful of how we engage with people on other issues, and be innovative and thoughtful about how we can slip the vegan message into discussions about war or the economy or housing and so on.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think in the end, it doesn't really matter whether it's going to be a revolution or an evolution, as long as it's a change. Both are changes. As long as we embrace the change, we're not afraid of the change, we become progressive. That's what the progressive person is. It's somebody that looks forward to the change. It's not looking back to this to be immobile. So as long as we people of the change, whatever we're going to call ourselves, and we progress towards a better world, then we can't just expect more from us than trying that. Well, that was an excellent conversation. We kind of got to the end of it, I think, naturally and time-wise. Is a perfect moment to stop it in the optimist / pessimist combination of, yeah, we are in big trouble, but things are changing, but in a nutshell. So let's leave it there. Thanks very much, Kim, for all your insights, and you backed by the history and the knowledge you have with all the things that other humans have done in the past. We're not just tiny people on the shoulders of everyone else. Well, thanks for all your conversation, and I hope we're gonna have another one in the future.
Well, that would be great. Thank you very much, Jordi, for inviting me, and thank you for going into Battersea Park and checking out the old brown dog.
No problem.
Did you know that it was there? Did you?
Yeah, I did know, and I hadn't met him before, but a long time ago. And I just was nice to for you to ask me to check that he's still there, that he's looked after. And yeah, there was a robin on the top protecting him from all strange breed. So it was an excellent experience I had.
And will I see you at the British Library in May?
You might. I'm not quite sure yet, but that's possible. That's possible. All right. Well, thanks very much for accepting my invitation, and thanks everyone for listening to it. So, see you. Bye.
Bye-bye, Jordi. Good luck with everything.